Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this very important conversation on AI governance in enterprises, how to scale AI without creating risk. I'm Srishti and I'll be your host for today's session. Over the last few years, AI has moved from experimentation to expectations. Boards are asking about it, leaders are funding it, and teams are piloting it. And yet, as organizations accelerate AI adoption, a new challenge has emerged. How do you scale AI responsibly without introducing risk? Many companies have already invested heavily in AI tools and initiatives. They have started embedding AI into workflows. But alongside this growth comes critical concern: data privacy, compliance, bias, lack of oversight, and unintended consequences. Leaders today are not just asking how do we adopt AI, they're asking how do we govern it effectively while continuing to scale. At Adoptify AI, we work closely with organizations that are excited about scaling AI, but are equally concerned about managing the risks that comes with it. What we have consistently observed at this, AI success isn't just about innovation, it's about governance, control, and accountability. And without the right structure in place, scaling AI can quickly create more risk than value. Today, we'll explore exactly that. And to guide us through this discussion, we are joined by two leaders who bring deep expertise in AI strategy, governance, and enterprise transformation. Joining us first is Chintan Dave, General Manager and Certification Director at Adoptify AI, who brings a deep technology and systems thinking perspective to AI transformation journey. Chintan has spent years working across emerging technologies and enterprise environments, helping organizations design AI strategies that are not only robust and scalable, but also governed effectively. His work aligns closely with the idea that successful AI scaling requires strong governance frameworks. In today's session, Chintan will share insights into how enterprises can build governance structure that enable AI growth while minimizing risk. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Jeff Fellis, Chief Operating Officer for AI Certs, AI Labs 365, and Adoptify AI. Jeff brings over 30 years of global leadership in emerging technology certification and learning ecosystems. Prior to this, he served as a president of CertNexus, where he led efforts to close the emerging technology skills gap through globally accredited AI and cybersecurity credentials. Jeff has a proven track record of scaling operations across 80 plus countries while building data driven, scalable systems. He also actively contributes to global skills and governance initiatives and various credentialing and cyber education boards. What makes Jeff's perspective particularly valuable for today's conversation is his ability to connect AI governance with real world scalability, ensuring that organizations can grow their AI capability while maintaining strong oversight and accountability. Now, without a further ado, I'd like to hand over the stage to Jeff and Chintan.
Thank you so much, Rishi. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Really pleased to be here again. My name is Jeff Leese, and I'm here with my colleague, Dave Chintan. We're getting two sides of the coin here. So I have the general management business background with AI experience, and Dave has real rich, deep AI experience and also general management experience as well. So hopefully you'll get a good sense of not only AI from a technology standpoint, but really what we're going to be talking about here is the governance of AI from an organizational perspective. And that really starts with the uncomfortable truth related to AI, right? The fact is AI is everywhere, right? It's in the news, it's at the workplace, it's in your home, it's on your phone, right? And within organizations, many employees are already using AI, right? So about 90% of employees use AI in some capacity today. Unfortunately, almost at the same amount of percentage of organizations have no visibility into how AI data flows across their organization, right? So they're encouraging individuals to use it, but as we'll learn, there's a lot of use that's taking place that is unorchestrated, it's not governed, not managed, right? And what you can see is that represents a risk to the organization, right? With the average cost of a data breach being at 4.63 million US dollars, right? So the fact is that in a standalone a shadow AI incident, and we'll talk more about shadow AI in a moment, but it's $670,000 for a standard incident for the use of shadow AI, again, with a data breach. So that, again, not to instill fear here, but really this is instilled to provide knowledge, right? The fact is, hey, organizations are leveraging AI today, but still we don't have full visibility to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about where you are with AI governance today within your organization, right? And we find that most organizations fall into four categories, right? So those who have no formal AI governance policy in place, right? They're utilizing AI as we talked about. So employees have access to it or have installed it or are utilizing it somehow, but that's not being governed. There's a policy, but it's not consistently enforced. A lot of organizations fall under here, right? We have a policy, but really your AI office or your CIO or CISO office really don't have any governance really over that consistently. Some have governance controls, but limited visibility into compliance, right? So you do have some controls in place, but where do you see whether people, individuals are being compliant with that or not, right? So lacking that dashboard view. And then we have the fourth, which is less common, but obviously, the level of maturity we all want to move to, which is, a mature governance framework, right? You have a governance framework, you have visibility into it, you can ensure compliance with that. So we'll be talking about that today and how we can move towards, all of us can move towards that level of maturity with our AI governance strategy. So we have a poll. Srishti is going to put up a poll for everyone to answer. And really what we're asking you here is where are why governance gaps happen, right? Do you think it's, because of speed? Is it, due to, right? Because AI is deployed in days, right? No longer these, multi-month or, even back, decades ago, multi-year implementation cycles, right? These are multi-days in some cases, or even a day. Shadow AI, right? Are employees using tools that you're not aware of? A policy lag, right? Your governance framework was built for software, right? Which understandably so. And now you have AI, right? AI requires a different governance framework than your previous software, even client server or cloud-based installations. Or no visibility. You can't govern what you can't see. So if you could just, again, list why you think in this poll and answer your questions. And then we'll give you a few more seconds to do that. And then Srishti, if we can close out the poll, great. And we can see the poll results, right? It's policy lag and no visibility, right? What we'll learn is you'll see is there's actually a lot of shadow AI happening. They again, and it's called shadow AI for a reason, right? Which is you're not aware of it, right? But it is happening across organizations. And Dave will talk a little bit more about this and doing inventory and inventory and your use of it, et cetera. So Dave, Dave wears many hats in our organization, and one is he runs our AI adoption office, right? And so Dave, you see this, right? Previously, before you put in a governance policy, what percentage of the AI use do you think you were able to actually have visibility to?
Honestly, it's very less, to be honest. And yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what, we see is what most organizations see here is there's a whole lot of use. Some of it's embedded in other tools, so you're not aware of it because it's embedded in another app or system. And in some cases, people have their personal preferences, right? I'm a Copilot user. I know Dave uses 4 different, chat tools, right? Minimum, right? So, he obviously governs them, right? Because he's actually responsible for that across the organization. But But what we saw was before Dave actually did, completed an inventory and started a governance program, we had a lot of individuals in well-intended, but using a lot of tools in ways that what were ungoverned, right? So it's kind of that iceberg theory that, hey, only a small percentage of the iceberg's above the water and most of it's below the surface, and what's happening below the surface. And that's in most organizations. And that's what we call shadow IT, right? Or shadow AI. It's happening, and you're just not aware of it. And Dave, I'm sure this sounds familiar to you as well, but there's obviously, what are some of the things that you looked for
Yeah.
when you started to say, hey, are we essentially governing our AI environment, our ecosystem today?
Absolutely. So, as we see this in the slide, and Jeff has rightly articulated that the actual state of many enterprises, like where they are right now, right? Where they actually see themselves in terms of an AI governance, right? So you see there are legal flags that actually saying that co-pilots are facing the HR data, right? And then you're talking about IT cannot confirm who has the access, what. There are a lot of open-ended point where you have tons of tools, which we have seen in the last slide, related to iceberg, right? You have lots of tools, but then you don't have clarity. You don't have the visibility in the system where, let's say my COO, Jeff, is asking me that, hey, where these tools are being used, so, and I'm going to go and say that, hey, I'm using it for the board meetings, I'm using it for summarizing it, but then this slide actually says that where we are and where we really need to check the status of our entire governance ecosystem, and it's little confused, which is good, but the most important problem is it's not about the employees are using the tools. The most important problem we are trying to solve is that, hey, they're using the tools, but where they're using it, how they're using it, I'm not sure if they're using it is a compliant way. Do you agree, Jeff?
Yeah, I do, Dave. And and you bring up some really relevant points here, right? Is we have organizations that are using it, but don't know how to start to actually using it in a governed way. We have those that are using it and maybe have some policies in place, but aren't aware of certain acts or legal regulations or industry regulations, right? So there's whole layers of this that you really need to unpack as an organization. And the fact is that AI is a useful tool, but like any tool, it needs to be used in ways that are compliant with your internal policies as well as industry or other national or international regulations as well. So with that, Dave's going to take us in the next several slides here. He's going to take us into a deeper dive into this discussion. And if we can go to the next slide here, and he's going to talk about the pillars of AI governance. And so this is an introductory slide, which Dave's going to take us through in the next few slides, and then I'll come back in a few slides to initiate further conversation. Thanks, Dave.
Appreciate it, Jeff. And I'll build on what we discussed lastly on the slide. So, like we mentioned, what matter is not about where the organization is right now, right? This is not about the failure of the governance. This is not about the maturity of an AI governance. It's about an adoption where we are actually moving the overall structure in a right way. And how do you govern it? So we actually try and articulate it, the 5 core pillars. We are actually, which is extremely important to set up an AI process in any organization. So let's say you talk about the policy. It actually gives you the complete visibility of what, how, when, where, and how many times. And then is it fully secure? If we're using the tools, do we actually understand that the tools are accessing what data? Are we fully compliant? And then if we are fully compliant, like, do you have a visibility that what is being accessed, how, and what data is being tapped? So the firstly, from policy to an accountability, where you're actually making sure that who is actually taking those decisions, right? So starting from a policy where we see that what AI can and cannot be used for. That's the most important part. It actually separates and includes also the use of restriction of the data, the rules, the escalation path, and how the AI is going to be used fully. So that's the policy part of it. When you talk about the security, which is the second most important pillar, this is about data access and permission. So let's say we are using, let's say, a co-pilot. What prompt we are writing, can we see those prompts? The answer is no. But how many times the token is being used, what token is being used for what prompt, it has to be noted down. That's the security part of it. So actually we are making sure that the understanding of the system on what AI can do up to certain level has to be evaluated properly. And that's what the data part of the security means. The third and most important critical piece is the compliance. That means, hey, in which geo region you are actually sitting, are you following the guidelines? Are you actually doing the internal audits? Are you actually making sure that the organization which is being using the tools is actually not uploading the client's data knowingly, unknowingly? And can you control it or not? And once you have a setup in the compliance part of it, like what visibility setup you are actually putting, right? And this is the often missing piece of the puzzle, because it answers you the critical question, who is using what, like it has says, and the context and with what kind of data. So we actually want to have a clear visibility on where the data is being used for. And fifth and most important part of the governance is an accountability. So if these pillars are actually weak, or they are not disconnected fully or connected fully, you will actually not have a visibility of the governance setup, which we will do with an AI. And as we build on the next slide, if you can move it to the next slide, you actually have a sign that, hey, what stage of your governance maturity is, so like AI is in use, governance is not, right? So the stage one is giving you the actual context. That stage one gives you the scenario that, we haven't written an AI acceptable policy yet, right? So what stage the governance are into? If you're using the tool, are we using the tool right way? Are we actually evaluating the risk behind it? If we're actually checking the risk, do we really log those risks effectively or not? So the permissions, the access matrix that we defined, the way the AI is going to be utilized, it is being audited, and then it is being audited right, so that we can actually move from the stage of a maturity to a stage of actual awareness and to take it to the next level. So let's say, if you can go move to the next slide, as you move to the awareness stage, we're actually talking about that, hey, you have the policies, but they are not being enforced. That means what? You have the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, but these procedures are actually giving us the notions, but how do we really make sure that we follow it? So this is where the enterprise believe that they have a better position, because they have some formal governance element in place. There may be an AI policy, there may be a review policy, there may be a tool they're using, or there may be a dashboard they're evaluating if they're using a certain tool. But the policy is not embedded into the actual workflow. What does that mean? Is governance is on the roadmap. We have not just prioritizing. That means if you are having the policy where you're, let's say, someone, whether CISO, CIO, legal, or a dedicated function, has to own the end-to-end operating model. So they must know what operationalization of this awareness stage would look like. And then you're actually going and tracking the usage, you're actually going and tracking the policies being enforced. And the most important part is, do you have a control over it? And then, is it being documented properly? Is it being aligned properly? And then during this entire phase, you are actually doing the audit that a policy without an enforcement, enforcement will not be a control. So it's a lot more into not only the paperwork, but actually making sure that you're actually putting those things in a place. And once you move from the maturity, governance maturity stage, from awareness to the next slide, please, the visibility and control are actually going to make it much more impactful. So you're actually trying to manage what has been evaluated and understood. This means let's say you're monitoring the co-pilot usage. Some departments may have a stronger governance practices versus the others would not have the stronger governance practices. That means what? The governance is there, but the governance is fragmented. That means some departments will have a thorough process that will follow while the other won't. So this is where the more mature process will come into the picture, right? We're actually trying to have a aligned setup where the governance is being monitored and has to extend to the one platform. You have an integration where you have a complete visibility of your governance stage. And once you figure it out, like we have mentioned clearly, that your data is being connected, that means your business, legal, IT, compliance, security, all have the shared visibility, but not fragmented visibility. That means the risk of staying here is that you cannot see that incident has happened and what action to take if something goes wrong while you're using the AI as a setup. So partial governance is actually a risky business, is what the managed stage says. So what you do is you try and move from a managed stage to a, if you can move to the next slide, please, the optimized and the most optimal stage, where this is where the governance becomes the continuous process for an enterprise. That means we have a real-time visibility onto all the AI tools that we are using across the enterprise. So you're actually not using the personal accounts of an AI tool where actually you cannot control the AI setup, who is prompting what, and then you do not have a control over it. You're actually using the compliance model where an enterprise grade system is being used. You actually manage the creation of the accounts, you actually manage the control, etc. So the governance is actually a competitive advantage here when you are actually optimizing it, because you're actually no longer treating it as a blocker during the process, but you're actually using it as an innovation. So at this stage, the organizations is not only monitoring the usage, but they're actually benchmarking it. That what stage you're actually going to have a signal that my ROI of the tool is being outlined, and then actually I'm enabling the scale with the proper governance and security in place. So you're actually optimizing the governance, and which is not actually a finish line, but it actually evolves as the overall process. So once you actually move from a governance stage, you actually have a mature setup process where they are actually continuously refining the policy, permissions, visibility, and the structure. So the goal is to have a structured, aligned process without investing too much in an administration overhead. The goal is to operate in a governance mode continuously. And as we can see, and if you can move to the next slide as a poll, Jeff, do you want to take over it? You're speaking on a mute, Jeff. Sorry. Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much, Dave. And and Dave lives this, right? Like I said, he's responsible for this across our organization. And what we found is that, right, if you're stage one, it's not wrong, right? It's a start. And I think that's, we purposely listed this out, and Dave, walked you through this, right? These are stages of maturity, right, Dave? So, if, you've experienced yourself, right? The goal is not to stay at stage one, it's to move to stage four. But it is a process, correct?
Fully agree. And you actually have to start somewhere. So you always start at the unmanaged stage. But when you start from unmanaged to an optimized stage, it will actually give you a process setup and the control without adding the overhead of managing an AI. So I fully agree, Jeff. Yep.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and for everyone as well, if you have any questions at this point, please put them in the chat. We'll answer questions throughout the webinar and also at the end of this session as well. But this is really a good, moment just to pause before we go to the next slide and just think about, where's your organization at today, right? Are you at that unmanaged stage? Is there some awareness, right? Have you moved over into the managed or that fully optimized, right? And what we're seeing in that fully optimized, it's a small percentage of organizations today. But again, that is the goal. But realizing, again, this is a process and you're going to work through these stages as you work to that optimized status. So So if we go to the next slide, please. So most organizations are managing governance reactively, right? It's a statement. It's unfortunately true, but that's where we are. And the reality is think about this, think about AI, right? AI has been, it's a technology that was, founded in the 1950s. It's gone through, some of these progressions. If we can go back to, thank you. And it's gone through some of these progressions. But really in the last several years, has it come to the forefront, right? It was being utilized in pockets of industry and a lot of times behind the scenes, but now it's at the forefront. And not as only the forefront, but it's also changing how we conduct business, right? And so organizations are naturally catching up. And for a period of time, as we go through that as AI goes through that maturation cycle, we're going to continue to be acting reactively until we can act proactively, right? So we have to just think about these things, what risk are we inducing by not moving forward, right? Understanding that at some point we got to catch up, right? We talked about shadow AI, right? That, the tip of the iceberg is what we see and everything else is happening below the surface, right? And so that's what's happening in many organizations today. So we need to bring that AI use out of the shadows into a governed environment. Where compliance is reactive, right? Compliance is intended to be proactive, right? If we're in compliance, then we're essentially reducing risk to our organizations. And without governments, everyone assumes that they can do whatever they want with AI because AI can do so many things, right? Well, you still, like you do, other, software use, right? You have policies that govern software use. We did this, right, with the advent of the internet, right? 20 years ago, we all started to put internet use policies in. It's the same thing here, right? We need to do that with AI, right? And with that, we're going to start to see in a governed environment is that we remove the shadow AI. We're able to track our tool usage, the data that we're using alongside of it. Compliance has just now become embedded, like we have with that internet use policy and those other software use policies. We now have, more visibility into our business and its use of AI. And again, we have verified and auditable, permission sets across our organization, right? So that is, again, that end state that we're looking for. If we can go to the next slide, please. And, every leader in your organization is going to have a different governance question, right? And we just have a sampling here, but, you can go across and look at, sales, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. The CEO is going to be, concerned about the things that are concerned about today about security, right? What's the liability? What's the risk, right? Along with, what are the productivity gains we're making, we're gaining from this? Do we have competitive advantages, any competitive disadvantages that we need to close the gap with AI, et cetera? So the CEO is going to look at, from, essentially both sides, right? How do we limit risk? But how do we, push the gas pedal and utilize AI to the full extent to enable our organization? The CFO is going to say, hey, are we essentially funding AI that's creating more risk than essentially the value it's bringing, right? So what's the ROI, right? And so, again, AI is a tool, and when used, with intention and well, right, it can be extremely productive for organizations. But without that, right, essentially you may be, again, without the compliance or the understanding, the shadow AI, you actually, again, we saw that up front, the risk to the organization, a single incident in the hundreds of thousands to millions of USD, right, could put the organization at greater risk than essentially the value you're gaining from it. The CIO and CISO, right, they're going to start to think about it from a technology and a security standpoint, right? And that extends out to data as well, right? So you think about it, your AI, even when you're using, a Copilot or Gemini, Claude, et cetera, even if you're using an enterprise edition, that's pulling from your data, right? And even though it is a secure environment and you want to prevent any type of leakage, right? Because when, someone then taking that data elsewhere, right? Now are you exposing data, exposing PII, right? Now, you have to think about different regulations, not only that are essentially regulating AI, but associated like GDPR and other types of data privacy laws as well. And then that really moves us into that legal and compliance, right? You think about it, and for those who are familiar with those data privacy laws or other cybersecurity regulations or accreditations, et cetera, right? You essentially pressure test that, right? You say, hey, we comply, but could you survive a regulatory audit, right? That audit could be internal, it could be by a third party body, right? So you have to think about it. Hey, would essentially our use today survive that, right? Or would we potentially, have nonconformities based on our use of it today? If we go to the next slide, please. So Dave's now going to, take us, we kind of, again, took a step back and say, hey, these are some things we need to consider. And so now Dave is going to actually show us what does, AI governance visibility look like, right? Again, we've talked about that governance, and part of governance is not only saying, hey, we're doing this, but you have to actually have the evidence that it is being done and being done in compliant ways. So Dave's going to take us through a few slides here that actually shows us what this could look like for your organization.
Appreciate it, Jeff. And you rightly mentioned, so this is one of the examples how we have actually built it for the Microsoft Copilot. And, the visibility is extremely important because what this slide is actually trying to give us as a context is that the governance cannot be answered through the disconnected reports, right? It has to be a curated data which is brought into a one operating view. So let's say if you're talking about the tools being used, let's say Microsoft Copilot as an example. So this dashboard actually clearly shows that how the data operating model looks like, right? So how many hours you're saving, where you are saving those hours, what activities we are using the co-pilots most for. So imagine the CEO should not have a one report and the finance has another versus the IT has another and legal has another. So we are actually trying to accumulate this in a one view where actually Adoptify AI is positioning this entire setup as a uniform governance layer. That means it actually translates the AI activities into a leadership level visibility, which Jeff has rightly articulated that you have various types of the leaders, how they are going to consume it. So it translates and helps the different stakeholders during this entire ecosystem asking the right question, and everybody would have a single source of truth. So this data is extremely important because it actually gives you the clear visibility on a week over week, day over day, where the tools are being used and how the tools are being used. Specifically, as we can see from the screen for the Microsoft Copilot, you can see how many hours are being saved, what tools we're using it for, what activities the actual use case of the Copilot is being done. So that is actually extremely important because it actually breaks down each function and how actually it incorporates the overall data that you have. So it actually helps you improve the alignment as well, because if you're talking about the use cases and the adoption as well as the governance, you want to know where your tool is being utilized max for, right? So and this alignment is extremely important because it will give you a broader level topic and the details to go through. So this is a kind of a view which will actually give you the overall the context. If you can go to the next slide, please. And as we move to the next slide, and I'm sure you can see the screen, now we're actually talking about the various teams wise views and the adoption that they are doing. That means what's the total actions, how many hours are being saved, what productivity we have actually used it for, and then do you have an activity breakdown for each of it as well. So this slide actually says that how the government visibility is being operationally aligned. That means the platform tracks the total AI action across the organization. So what tokens are being used? If actually you're using the tokens, what the productivity trend would look like. It also shows the estimated amount of ROI you have gained. That means what amount of dollars we are saving. We are investing a lot of time in tool, in money, and this this AI tools, what's the capacity of this ROI would look like. Third and most important piece of this actually it shows is about the numbers of hours being saved. So number of hours on what use cases we are actually showing. And then fourth and most important component, as you can see, it shows about the percentage of the productivity you have gained. That means how many hours you're actually saving using an AI tool, and you're actually having the clear visibility of the governance as well. That means you have a breakdown of meetings, emails, chats, documentation, how many conversation you have it, and then you will actually ask why is this useful, right? Because the governance is not just about that you're using an AI actually, right? It also about where your AI is being used. So it is extremely important how AI is being utilized, and this difference of analytics actually gives you a pattern which actually give you a oversight of entire process. So where and when your entire process is creating a value, it's not only about the ROI but also about the structure governance model. And as you can move to the next slide, please, you can see that we're actually talking about the overall gap we can accumulate from this process as well. So let's say what you have it, and why, what the adoption would look like. So let's say if you're talking about you have deployed the Microsoft Copilot, and then you do not have a governance visibility, and then once you deploy the Adoptify AI, we're actually making sure that you have a clear visibility between the entire process. That means this is a practical way of adopting the tool with a proper structure and the governance in place. So we're actually trying to bridge the gap between the openness of an AI setup versus how you can literally utilize it for the broader perspective, so that the gap doesn't stay related to the tools, risk, audit, but then we're actually flagging out and managing and automating the various tasks which actually helps you actually align the adoption gap. So the four more important aspects are actually being listed down, which actually gives us the idea that a manual management of the AI tool is actually going to give you a very less visibility. Within Adoptify AI, we are trying to make and help within organizations and the clients that we are working with, that how we can automate the overall monitoring process, and then you keep an eye on the entire execution as it moves. So the most enterprises do not need another AI tool, is what we're trying to say. They need the governance layer that makes their entire AI ecosystem more manageable and then ROI driven. And then when you talk about an ROI, how you actually going to count it is extremely important as well. So if you can move to the next slide, and that's where the CEO, CFOs, you talk about more, and Jeff and I talk about it almost every day, that hey, where we are putting the money, so you want to count it where you're actually putting the money, right? So the most important aspect is that it's not about the cost, it's also about the regulatory process, it's also about how are you a reactive versus you are a proactive, right? So if you can see, average cost of an enterprise data breach is 4.63 million. It's a huge cost, right? And it's something like, hey, we have missed it. If you see the overall process, if it's been governed properly, you can leverage the productivity, but then you can still stay safe. So this cost is extremely important when you're talking about an AI when which is not governed. And because the things are changing so fast in the world of AI, to keep up with the regulations and compliance, it has become extremely important, because when you're talking about the enterprise accounts or the clients, you're actually dealing with the data of a client, and you're working on a multiple region. You want to make sure that your data is fully protected, the client's data is fully protected, and that's where the governance level view makes an extremely important point. So when you are actually waiting for an incident to happen rather than you're actually proactively measuring out out and taking proactive action on top of it. So if your employee is using, let's say, untracked tool, they are inconsistent, they're using duplicatively, or they're using it unsafely, the enterprise loses not just the control, but also the measurable productivity. So actually it's a twofold, that you are actually tracking it, but then you're actually governing it effectively as well. So when you talk about an ROI and governance, it becomes two side of the coin, that you're actually getting the return of investment, but then you are safe enough to use these tools as well. So as you put an investment, and Jeff would be the right person to talk about it, you extremely make sure that you're putting the governed investment rather than you're putting an investment which is not a safe one. So the cost of ungoverned AI is so huge when you don't track the basics of the component, when you're setting up the tools and the workflows and the multiple processes that you are going to work on. If you can move to the next slide. And before I hand it over to a Jeff, as you can see that you're actually investing into a quantifiable and governed setup. So one of the biggest issues in the enterprise AI right now is that the organizations are paying for an AI programs without the clear measurable model. So let's say someone from the team is asking, hey, I want to deploy a Copilot, I want to deploy a Cloud AI, I want to deploy a ChatGPT, and then we deploy it, and then you don't know where the licenses are being used, where they're using it for. Technically, you have a very less or low visibility of it, and that's where the Adoptify AI sits and asks the organizations really well, that we are giving the complete financial visibility, we're actually giving complete overall visibility of a governance and the adoption as well. So we are trying to make you safe by having the governance process, and then we are actually making sure that you have a clear visibility on an ROI as well. So these dashboards are fully practical, live, available, integrated with many of our clients and our systems as well. When you can, within the click of the systems, you can identify what's your ROI. Now we are not talking about an ROI only in terms of the usability or productivity, but then, hey, are you safe using those use cases or not? So this is an extremely important point as I hand over to Jeff to talk more about the various transformation phases that we are using and the plans that we would like to go deep into. Yeah, over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Dave. And as we go to the next slide, again, what Dave just shared with us, right, is the fact that we do need to have visibility, right, and there is the ability to measure. I think that's one of the things that is not apparent to everyone, is that as we go through this transformation in our workplace that is being accelerated by AI, is that we have ways to say, hey, we used to do work this way, and now we're doing it this way, and it resulted in Y savings, right? So I think it's important for us to understand these are measurable outcomes, right? And that's the big thing that should be your focus of your AI implementations and your governance of them, is it's outcome driven, right? It is about that taking that organization and re-looking at the work we're doing, right? It's not, I use the example all the time. When we put word processors on desktops, it allowed us to essentially produce documents more quickly, right? So there was an advantage to that, but we really didn't make a lot of productivity gains in the workplace because of word processors, right? With AI, we can make those productivity gains, right? We can essentially automate those rote tasks or even some more complex tasks that are well understood, right? So, and as Dave showed us, you can measure that, right? And it's so you can not, and it can be, in output, it can be hours saved. There's so many ways you can measure that as well. And so when you think about that, we like to think about, really kind of being in three places where you are right now as your organization. Are you at that early visibility stage, right? Do you just need to do some initial tracking, have a departmental view? Maybe you haven't rolled out your AI tool sets across the entire organization, or you have, but you want to say, hey, I really want to understand how we do this at a single department before we roll this out across the organization. but you'd still want that governance scorecard, right? So that's what we call that early visibility. The next is our acceleration stage, right? And this is now where you're starting to expand the scope, right? So it's getting larger, it's going beyond that initial department. And now you're starting to look at those productivity and time savings that Dave shared in that last slide, right? You're starting to get to an ROI calculation, right? Money spent, money saved, money earned, whatever it is, right? And essentially, what's that ratio, right? What does that look like for our organization? And starting to get that workflow level tracking, right? And this is really, really it starts to enable your maturity, not only of your, governance, but also your use of AI, right? Because now you're thinking about, hey, how do we introduce AI into our workflows? So it's not a tool that sits alongside our workflows, but it's actually embedded in our workflows, and even probably to the extent of not only embedded in our workflows, but changing our workflows entirely, right? So rethinking our work. Right. And that takes us really to that enterprise transformation. Right now, we're looking at doing this typically enterprise wide. We now have, a lot of parties that are interested, right? So we have to share dashboards. Dave talked about that, right? He and I work closely together, and we both like data. We both like to, look at that data and look at, where are the areas that we have improved, where we can have further improvement, right? And dashboards provide and reporting provides that to us. We can start to make some predictive insights, right? AI in its essence is a predictive tool, right? So it helps us do that as well. And we have these measurements to help us do that and start to benchmark ourselves, right? How are we comparing against our, nearest competitors, the overall competitive set in the marketplace, whether it's industry or beyond, right? So we want to start to see some of these things as, we grow our businesses and ensure that, we remain competitive in the marketplace. And again, AI is going to be, instrumental to all of our success as we drive these outcomes. If you go to the next slide, please. So also look at industry-specific governance. I started to hit on this the last slides as well, right? So even the solutions that we generate, we typically want to look at your industry because your industry will many times determine the intended outcomes. And again, AI is really suited to drive outcomes, right? Those outcomes being all the things we talked about, right? Whether it's furthering your products or services, it's reducing costs, effort, improving quality, right? All those things. AI is a tool that helps produce those outputs, right? And again, a lot of it is going to be specific to the industry you sit in, right? So healthcare, there's going to be certain things that you may want to do with clinical data sets, right? Again, healthcare is like many of these is a data rich industry. So how do we do that? But how do we do that in compliance with certain regulations? I know like in the US, we have the HIPAA compliance, right? Not to share, medically sensitive data, right? If we go over to manufacturing, right, we're now looking at, AI not only at the desktop, but right in the field, right? So how are we using AI, in combination with other technologies like IoT, digital twins, et cetera? So now we're starting to do predictive analytics around maintenance, right? Reducing downtime. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do there. Financial services, right? Everything from ensuring our own regulatory compliance to, if in banking we're doing it to reduce fraud or increase, trading activity or et cetera, right? There's a lot to do there. Same in, the legal and professional services, right? We're starting to see some of those lower level, tasks that entry level professionals doing are, being facilitated by AI, right? So how do we do that? And then how do we better leverage, those individuals in other capacities and in retail as well, right? And so, whether it's supply chain, or dynamic pricing or a variety of ways that we're utilizing this, how do we do that in ways that produce results for our business while still, staying within that regulatory environment? So again, this is really where we start to think about, taking, our level of AI confidence, right? So going from uncertainty to, what we like to consider board ready, right? So there's before and there's after, right? So think about that before, and Dave alluded to it a lot earlier, right? Hey, it's kind of unknown. We have this shadow AI. People are using it, but we're not sure if how they're using it. Are they using it in ways that we would permit them to use it? Are they getting any benefit from it, right? What risk is that actually presenting to our organization? And then after, right, thinking about, governance no longer is a blocker, but an enabler, right? Essentially, you can ensure that, hey, our organization is using AI in the ways that we intended them to do. They're using it in efficient and effective ways, and ways that we can actually not only support, but actually our governance helps facilitate, right? So you start to remove those risks before they present themselves, and we actually are now being able to scale at a larger scale, because we now have AI as, again, a part of our organization,
Yep.
and we're an AI adopted organization. And Dave, if you want to talk a little bit about that, right? You've experienced this yourself, right? As someone that is a CTO, someone that leads an AI adoption office, can you talk a little bit about your experience and the confidence it's built for you?
Absolutely. And like as we are building the Adoptify AI and we are helping the organization, like rightly Jeff has mentioned, there are three-fold processes very, very important. We need a better readiness, we need a better defensibility, and then we need a better control as well. And these are the three most important buckets which we actually align it. And then as you have seen that we try and make it with a dashboard that we have it so that you have a safe and aligned process, but then you are not slowing it down as well. That means the transformation you're working on is extremely important, because the compliance is the most important part which you want to tap into, but then you want to also make the innovation side of it align it. And that's what we want to make sure that your AI confidence stays in the overall innovation, but then you use it safely, as Jeff has rightly mentioned as well. So as Adoptify AI touches to the process, we actually go to this process of discovery. We understand the problem, we try and touch point, and then we note it down everything in terms of, in a way that what's gonna be a flag bricks versus what's gonna be an innovation plan, what's gonna be a governance plan. And then you actually are making the overall setup which is allowing the process to become much more safer, but then you have a complete visibility with a dashboard, and then you are actually knowing it which area of the use case you can make the champions on. So it is clearly a shift from an uncertainty to a visibility, and the control is what we're trying to build the AI confidence on, as Jeff rightly mentioned. Yes, Jeff.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we're coming to the conclusion of our presentation today. We do have a handful of minutes left for questions. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. I always say the best question is the first question, because it gets us started. But again, really, what we want you to take away from this is that, AI is being used pervasively across most organizations, whether you know it or not, right? So this is the opportunity to, at least catch up, if not get in front of it, right? And put those governance models into place. And again, with that, also look at, hey, how can I drive visibility to actually whether AI is actually a productive tool for our organization? It can be, right? But again, looking at that transformation of thinking about, hey, how do we actually work, right? And how do we work with AI, right? The sense of, do I have agents doing some of this work? So am I managing people and agents? And then how do I measure the success of that, right? So Dave showed us some dashboards, right? Visibility to that. So you can actually see the ROI that is your AI solutions are delivering. So if you are interested in learning more about our Adoptify AI consultative services, right? These are outcome-based services looking to help you drive adoption. And we look at it as, you're adopting, then you're adapting, and you're accelerating. And so your use of AI, so in a governed manner, obviously, you can look at the QR code and send information if you desire to do so. Again, for us, we like to join you along on these journeys, because One is that we've done it ourselves, and we've again went through that maturity cycle ourselves. And each stage presents its own challenges, right? All that can be overcome with intentionality and with the right set of tools and services. But ultimately, right, you want to have that visibility. Is it delivering value? Is it delivering value to our organization and reducing risk at the same time? I don't see any questions coming at this time. So if we don't have any questions, we can work to conclude our webinar. I want to thank Dave Chintan again, our CTO, and also the head of our AI adoption office. Obviously, his insights are extremely valuable to our organization. We're pleased to be able to share them with you as well. Please also feel free to reach out to Dave and I on LinkedIn at any point in time and connect. We love connecting with colleagues across the globe. And we look forward to the opportunity to interact with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.